Welcome to the Literacy Lunch Break. We are excited to chat with Dr. Ernie Ortiz today, principal of Walt Disney Elementary School in Pennsbury School District. Thank you for joining us today, Ernie. I always enjoy our conversations, and I know I've been following your journey for a while, but we would love for our listeners to hear a little bit more about you. So if you wouldn't mind just giving a little background about your experience, your different roles, and really what inspired you to focus on literacy.
Well, thank you for having me, Marjorie. And I've always been a big fan and supporter of Heggerty. And, my journey has been one where a few years ago when I was a building principal in a prior school district, really learning about the science of reading and structured literacy and having this call to action to really impact literacy achievement and change in the school where I was leading as a building principal. That started my journey to where I am today. Set me forth on a path where my dissertation focused on structured literacy and literacy practices, particularly at the primary level and kindergarten, first and second grade, and took a step away from public education, went into the nonprofit sector for 1 year. But my calling to serve and work alongside teachers in support of students in a community brought me back to the public ed setting. And here I am back in the saddle, if you will, in the Pennsbury School District at Walt Disney Elementary School, working with teachers, wonderful teachers, and getting to serve students and their families on a daily basis, all while focusing on all aspects of school, but particularly literacy, because it's so critically important.
Lucky district, lucky teachers, students, and parents. So that exactly, right? Like we have to focus on all aspects. I think that's one of the biggest challenges as a leader. There are many different things, just not that academic side that you really have to, lead and monitor. But as we think about that focus on literacy, I know there's a shift in education. We're talking about it, and that's so important. And it's so critical, but we have to do more than talk, right? We have to actually implement the change. And that does mean that our leaders have to be knowledgeable. They have to know not only the knowledge of how to teach, but how to implement, how to support educators and communities. So as we think about that, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about like what that role looks like as a building leader. What are some things you have to put in place, and how, I think, not only just beginning the change, but how do we sustain that change?
Yeah, so years ago when I first started learning about the science of reading and reading research, embodying that lead learner, being the lead learner for your building, for your district, and understanding what structured literacy is and the science behind it. And then even more importantly, how it translates to the classroom,
right?
And in building practice, because that's where we as building leaders really differentiate ourselves from being an instructional leader or a manager, which was kind of like the historical perspective of building principals, years, decades ago, whatever. And so, the shift really truly of being that instructional leader where we have this capacity to come in and serve as thought partners alongside our teachers so that we can support them with their development, building their capacity, and then helping them with refining instructional practices, using assessments to guide those decisions in the classroom. And then with the systems at the building level, how we help support things like the multiple tiers that we have to oversee in tiers 1, 2, and 3 with regards to MTSS, what the instruction and assessment look like across all 3 tiers, and then the systems that are in place to support students who might need that little extra support through interventions. And how do we work to really refine those systems to support the classroom teachers and everything that they do so that ultimately we see growth and achievement from our students?
Yeah. And that's a big undertaking, right? Because again, there's so many layers to that, where it's the knowledge and the support, but the systems, I heard you say that word a lot, those systems. Can you share maybe just some of the systems that you have in place to support your teachers with looking at that assessment data? I think, that's a whole a whole nother topic
Yeah.
about not only just administering assessments, but how do we really dig into those assessments? How does that drive us forward? How do we learn and, let that be something, a tool that we use to drive our instruction? But
Yeah.
what are some of those systems that you have in place to support educators?
So, two systems that I think of as the building leader, I've often used this analogy for my teachers, and it's my brother-in-law is a dentist. So bear with me. Quick story. He's a dentist, and I go to see him, and I'll see him for a few minutes, but the dental hygienist does a lot of the other work with
Yeah.
me, and then he comes in for a few minutes, and then that's it. The systems that we have in place, that metaphor kind of resonates with me because my teachers are like the dentist. I don't want them to be burdened by some of the aspects that might serve as barriers to the important aspects of making those instructional decisions based off of the data to then impact their instruction. So, as the building leader with my specialists and my team, my leadership team, we work on pulling data, cleaning the data up, presenting the data in a way that the teachers can then synthesize it, analyze it, and make decisions. So we are like the dental hygienists that do all this work
I
to
love
eliminate
this.
barriers. The teachers are like the dentists that come in and they are
Yeah.
making those important decisions, analyzing, synthesizing. What are those barriers that we can eliminate from the teacher's perspective so that they can make those critical decisions and synthesizing of the research of the data, I should say. And so with that, using our local assessments, beginning, middle, end of year data, so that they
Hmm.
can do that. And then importantly, the second system is our intervention model with regards to how we go about collecting data through progress monitoring, and then how do we analyze and interpret that data to gauge our return on instruction, because ultimately it's the
Right.
impact of our instruction that we're looking at, because if we want our children to achieve and show a level of growth, it's incumbent upon us and our instruction and then the systems with regards to progress monitoring and analyzing that data to see if that instruction is having the impact that we desire. And if it's not, then how do we go about shifting as needed? Those are the two systems, at least at the building level, that we've been able
Yeah.
to work on over my first year here at Walt Disney, and have seen great success with regards to implementing those systems where teachers feel supported and a level of satisfaction with where their acumen is building with regards to structured literacy and the implementation of structured literacy.
Yeah, I mean, I love that analogy. It's so true, and nobody's ever, that's just a very clear way of looking at it. And really, what are those barriers? How do we help teachers not feel that overload of so much going on? I don't really have time for this, this, and this. But with that, also, I'm just thinking it's like that, almost like that sneaky PD at the same time, because we're kind of gathering all of this data for you. We're kind of helping you synthesize and understand it, where we're not just giving you a chart. We're saying here are the things to look at, and then having those discussions around instructional implications, which is phenomenal. Now,
Yeah.
that sounds great, and it sounds like you've got a pulse on if educators are feeling supported. But with that, we know there's many layers to education, especially as we start to shift. Maybe we, as I share often, every educator wants to do the best for their kids. Nobody goes into education not wanting to do the best.
Yeah.
But if I've been teaching a certain way for a really long time, or if I learned some stuff in undergrad and now I'm teaching, and then all of a sudden there's this shift, that's a hard thing to do, not just for many reasons, not just kind
Yeah.
of shifting what you've learned, but also just a whole new routine. So with that,
Mhm.
as you've started to make these shifts, even when teachers are supported, do you find any challenges? And then how are you overcoming those challenges?
Yeah, the challenges of ingrained practices, that's probably
Yeah.
the most challenging aspect of this, of shifting the paradigm,
Hmm.
both instructional practices and assessment practices. And then when you're tied to something like the report card, where we have to
Right.
report out to the parents, uh, this is how your child is producing, or how they're conveying their skill in the classroom, how they're exhibiting their proficiency. Those ingrained practices of how they've done that with parents and engaged parents in a way to kind of capture how the child is performing in the classroom, though that is so hard to shift
Yes.
from something that's been really tidy for so many years and easy to deliver, to then being able to understand, synthesize it on their own, and then to convey that level of understanding in a way that they feel comfortable and confident with. Because uh, ultimately, it's a feeling of uncertainty
Yes.
or being uncomfortable with the new that then possibly leads to reverting back to past practices. And so, how do we go about addressing that? Well, uh, providing ongoing professional development, providing that level of reassurance that we are here. I'm here as your building leader to help support you and be that thought partner alongside of you, not simply being a top down type of person
Right.
where here's the expectation, and if it's not going to be followed, there might be some punitive response to it.
Hmm.
It's that level of that two-way dialogue where teachers feel heard, supported, acknowledged for the challenges that they might be experiencing. And then how do we go about moving forward in a way that I will support you in all aspects of instruction, assessment, delivery, conversations with stakeholders, parents specifically, students as well. And then what resources do you need so that we can
Right.
get to where we need to go? And that's another aspect of the challenges, because sometimes teachers are embracing of this, of the shift, but then the resources serve as a
Right.
barrier. And then with that, how do we go about accumulating the proper resources when, budget constraints come into play, and
Hmm.
other barriers that might prevent us from securing the resources that we need in a timely manner?
Yeah, and I think that's, that's such a big piece. As you were saying that, I'm thinking the same thing. I'm like, we might have okay, I recognize this needs to shift. I understand I have the support of my building leader, but I need this, this, and this. And so that's, how do you overcome that challenge?
You got to be creative. Yeah, and you have to prioritize what are those aspects, resources wise, time wise, that need to be addressed. I can give you an example. Decodable
Yes.
readers were one of the first things that we identified in my current building that we were trying to accumulate and gather. We did it through a combination of building money, grants, funding through the district. So those were three ways that we were able to
Yeah.
secure decodable readers in our primary grades. And then looking long term, that was more short term success, medium and long term success, K-5, also through our intervention systems with regards to the resources that they need to help support students, especially the students who are struggling or who aren't showing that level of acceleration that we'd like to see. So that's where we have to be creative and and
Hmm.
and come up with ways as a team. I had teachers writing grants and doing it on their own accord. The
Yeah.
initiative that they were showing was incredible and extremely motivating. And so with that, serving as a facilitator and someone who can help that process not be a barrier to
Right.
their initiative, that's another aspect of being a leader, where you're fostering this level of paradigm shift in a way that you're facilitating the shift and not serving as a barrier.
Yeah, I love what you said, because you said multiple things there, but again, you're coming back to making sure that you're removing the barriers for teachers, and I think that's really important. I was an assistant principal before I came to work for Hegarty, and I just remember so often, teachers would come and say, "Oh, we need this, this, and this," and often the response from the building or even the district sometimes was, "Well, we just don't have funds for that,"
Yeah.
rather than, "Okay, let's look at this. Can we prioritize number one? Because
Mhm.
we can't always get everything we wish. That would be so nice.
Mhm.
But then also, as we prioritize, where I just heard you mention three different sources that you're pulling
Yeah.
funds from. And with that grant writing, it could be district level, building level, or, donors choose, or teachers writing grants as well is a phenomenal way to get the resources and work together.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. So as we think about the things that you're putting in place, and I already heard you talk about, teachers feeling supported and how successful this year was. We also know, as we're implementing change, it's really important to monitor and measure the impact of that change. So can you talk about some of the ways, you're measuring impact on students, but also, teachers, like how are you measuring,
Yeah.
or just, checking in with them to see how the changes are, how they're going and how you can support them.
Ultimately, improved student performance achievement is what is looked
Yep.
at. And so with our local assessment data, particularly our Acadians and our progress monitoring data, we saw some great gains,
Yeah.
some really positive great gains. And then our growth measure data in the grades 2 to 5. So we saw a lot of tremendous growth and movement. So we saw growth within the students, but then movement across categories. So where students might have been in the does not meet category to start the
Hmm.
school year, some of them, a lot of them were shifting into the meets, if not exceeding category.
That's
And
amazing.
so capturing that movement from beginning to middle, and then middle to end, and then beginning to end, and looking at that data and always bringing it to the forefront after every cycle. That conversation was ongoing and always
Hmm.
had at our building. And so looking at the progress monitoring data in between as well, so that we can see again the impact of our instruction, particularly with students who needed that level of support beyond tier one. But also looking at progress monitoring of implementation. It's not just progress
Oh,
monitoring of
yes.
students; it's the progress monitoring of us implementing uh,
Yes.
what it is that we're doing across all tiers, at tier one and tiers 2 and 3. So the systems in place to support effective identification and support of struggling students was really improved this school year. And then qualitatively, I take great pride in keeping the pulse of my building.
Hmm.
And I put out surveys to my teachers, and at the end of the school year, I like to ask my teachers to fill out a more qualitative response to how they felt the school year was. And one of the things that emerged as a theme from that survey was that teachers had this increased sense of confidence and
Yeah.
proficiency in structured literacy instruction, and pedagogical practices with assessment. And that helped them feel reassured that what it is that they were learning and what they were implementing, that they were feeling a sense of pride and a level of confidence finishing the school year, and with an eye towards next year to always improve and refine the practice. So, you have the quantitative aspect
Yes.
to really capture impact. But there's also that important qualitative piece that really helps resonate and foster that positive climate and culture, which will ultimately lead to improved student achievement.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that in because that's critical, right? You're not going to make change and have it be sustainable and impactful if you're not creating the culture of really just a community of practice and learning, right?
Yeah.
Um, oh, I could just talk to you all day, Ernie. But we try to keep our episodes nice and short because we know teachers and leaders. I always do like to ask at the very end, although you shared so many really impactful and important points. If a building leader, a teacher, even a district leader, they were listening to this episode and they're recognizing a need for a shift or change, but it seems really big, right? How do you go about this? If they were to leave this episode with just one key takeaway, what would you want them to leave with?
You have to be emotionally intelligent when leading this work. That's one aspect of my time as building principal specifically that has resonated with me and has served me well, in my opinion, and
Mm-hmm.
that has helped facilitate the level of collaborative efforts that I have had success with in my previous building and here at Walt Disney. Being the emotionally intelligent and aware leader will help you with this work, because one thing that I found out during my time during this shifting of work and leading is that there's a lot of passion tied to literacy.
Yes.
And with that, having the emotional intelligence to understand how to navigate those passions,
Yes.
really important, because as the point that you made earlier, all the teachers have good intentions, and it's with those good intentions that oftentimes can
Yeah.
be uh, be something that we have to navigate as
Yes.
leaders, and we
Yes.
have to do it tactfully and with a
Mhm.
level of genuine sincerity and empathy, so that we can support teachers with this shift so that we can ultimately support our students.
I love that. What a wonderful takeaway, and absolutely so important. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm so glad our listeners get to learn from you. Thank you for joining us today.
It was my pleasure, Marjorie. Thank you for having me.
Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we explore literacy topics in a snack-sized, easily digestible format.